Let's talk about climbing gear. This is definitely something I like to nerd out over, so let me know if you have any additional questions if I don't answer that in this introduction of gear. So, to start, there is lots of gear options, and I'm going to talk about some of the most common, more of the introductory level gear. But this is an industry that has been around for a long time, continues to get more efficient and lighter and stronger. So there's definitely a lot more detail than what I'll be going into. But let's go ahead and start with shoes because that's the first thing that you will need in order to climb. And why I said that is because, like we talked about in our last lecture, we know that the most basic form of climbing that uses the least amount of gear is bouldering, right? Technically, the only thing that you need is shoes. So, to start, let's talk about the fit of climbing shoes because there's common misconceptions that you should buy your climbing shoes as tight as you possibly can. Now, as you get more into climbing and more advanced, you can start making decisions for you if you would like to have your shoes be tighter, if you feel like you can experience and get connected with the rock better, then sure, get tighter climbing shoes. But for the sake of introductory climbing, it is really important that your shoes still fit comfortably. Yes, you want them to be snug, typically snug without any socks, um, to go all the way around your foot, but you don't want it to be painful because even more so than a regular shoe, as you use this, a lot of the weight is placed in a very specific part of your foot, like on your toe or heel or something like that. So having the shoe fit perfectly rather than overly tight is important. Okay. Um, what makes a climbing shoe is going to be the specialized rubber. Okay. And so you'll notice that around here along the toe and the heel, mostly in the toe, all the way around, and also right here and some underneath. So this specialized rubber just connects to the rock in a different way. Okay. It is typically stickier if it's colder outside, and that's why you'll see a lot of the professional climbers do their big wall main climbs in the cooler months rather than in the summer. Okay. So let's talk about the difference in shoes, just so you know if you happen to come across a good sale or something like that. So I'll go ahead and start with this shoe here. This is what we call an approach shoe, which is basically a tennis shoe that you use to walk to the climbing spot. Usually you can't just drive up to the rock wall. You have to hike in. And so a lot of the times this requires what we call scrambling, as well as walking on weird rocks or needing your hands even though you don't need a rope. And so this is good for comfort and also allows you to stick to some of that rock that you are scrambling through. Below it right here is what we would call an all-around shoe, okay? And this means you can tell that by how flat the shoe is, so it doesn't have any sort of arch, okay? So nice flat shoe, comfortable and meant to be worn all day, okay? So you'll see this a lot on big wall climbs, traditional climbing, that trad climbing that I was telling you about in the last lecture. You'll see more of these all-around shoes that are flat. Next to it here is where you'll see a lot of this actually in the climbing gyms, and this is going to be an aggressive shoe that has a point. It's not going to be as comfortable as the first two options that I told you. Typically, you'll see people take these shoes off in between climbs, so if they're not actively climbing, if they're belaying or if they're waiting, then they won't be wearing their shoes because they're not comfortable to be in unless you're on the wall. But what this does, this aggressive shoe here, this point, allows you to climb more advanced rock and get into the nooks and crannies of the rock. Okay? And finally, I call this the crack shoe, and What this is you'll notice the difference in feature here is that it comes up on the ankle. So it's just protecting if you are in a crack and having to climb up through that crack so that you're not scratching your ankles as you climb. But what you will notice is that this is a very similar shoe to the all-around shoe down here. When we're talking about harnesses, there are lots and lots and lots of different harnesses. And so what we're going to do is talk more about the anatomy of the harness so that way you can make the proper decision for you. So first of all, you have your traditional harnesses, and those are for trad climbing. Then you have your sport, which is a little bit more lightweight because you're typically doing the predetermined climb, so you're not having to carry this additional gear. Big wall and aid climbing has their own type that are geared towards carrying more gear, strapping it in different places, things like that. And then there are kids harnesses specific to kids that come around the shoulder and clip in the chest so that way they can't fall upside down. So what is the anatomy of a harness? What are some of the features that we're looking for? To start out, this here is your waist belt, okay? If I go back to the previous screen, you want your harness to always fit above your waist, okay? So that's when we're talking about this waist belt here. So wherever you can feel your iliac crest, your hip bones, you want that waist strap to be above your hip bones. The reason for that is if you are to fall upside down, you don't want to slip out of your harness. So your hips will actually act as that barrier. Okay. The hall loop, most people connect this to their chalk bag. Not super important for this class. Next is going to be gear loop. That's going to be a feature that people look for in a harness, the number of gear loops that you have. This is where you would clip things like your belay device or any of your protection that is required to climb. This buckle is a very unique feature and you want to pay attention to. Some buckles are already what we call double backed, and we'll talk more about that in the belay section of this class. But this is double backed, and some you have to actively double back to make sure that you don't slip out of the harness. So paying attention to one that most harnesses that you buy at REI or some sort of sporting goods store at this point are automatically double backed. But knowing that feature is important because if it doesn't automatically double back, you need to make sure to hook that together properly. Okay. Next, this is the belay loop. This is actually a loop in the harness that you tie your rope into, okay, as a climber using a figure 8. So if you were to change the direction of the harness, you would notice that this is a loop and not just the front section here. This is where, I'm sorry, this is not where you tie in as a climber. This is where you tie in as a belayer. You clip in as a belayer, okay? These are your tie loops here. So there's a tie loop here and a tie loop here. And as a climber, you tie your rope through both so you are doubled in, so if one was to fail, you would still be connected to the harness. Okay, so again, I made a mistake there. Belay loop, you clip in as a belayer. Tie-in loops is where you tie in as a climber. Leg loops here, most of the time, every harness has these loops. Most of the time, most harnesses that you see will have a buckle right here, so the leg loops are adjustable. And some of the really lightweight alpine climbing, they won't have a buckle to shave weight, so it's a one size fits all. And you would buy your size according to the size of your legs, and depending on what you're wearing. So how to fit into a harness. Let's go ahead and watch this video.
Hey guys, I'm Miranda with REI, and today we're going to talk about how to put on and check the fit of a climbing harness. So the first thing that you want to do when you take your harness out of the bag is just make sure that there are no twists in the harness before you put it on. So on this harness, you see that you have the waist belt, which goes around your waist, and then the leg loops, which obviously go around your legs. And what we're looking for is that there are no twists in any of the elastic or any of the front part of the harness. The easiest way to do this is just to hold it in front of you so that the belay loop is facing away from you, and make sure that there are no twists in the elastic on the back of the leg loops. So this looks pretty good. Before you step into the harness, make sure that all of the buckles are loosened up. This just makes it easier to put it on. On this harness, there's only one double back buckle, but sometimes we'll have up to 4. So 2 on the waist belt and then 2 on the leg loops as well. There are 2 main ways that people will put on harnesses. One is just to set it on the ground and then step into it and pull it up. The other is just to put it on like pants, which is what I generally do. So you just step into it the same way that you would the legs on your pants. That's 1 and 2 leg loops. We want the waist belt on the harness to be over your hip bones. This is just so that in case you were to flip upside down, you're not going to fall out of the harness. So once I have the leg loops up and the waist belt on the harness up over my hip bones, I'm going to go ahead and tighten it down. So I'm just grabbing this strap that comes from one side of the padding and then pulling it in the opposite direction. And then adjust the leg loops. There we go. So now that I have the harness on, we're going to talk about fit. The most important thing for fit of a harness is ensuring that the waist belt fits you. A good way to check this is by grabbing onto the gear loops and pulling down, making sure it doesn't go over your hip bones. Or you can take a flat hand and insert it into the waist belt of the harness, make a fist, and make sure you can't pull it out. Ideally, when you have the right harness, the padding on the harness will be touching or slightly overlapping. If it's totally maxed out, you don't get a ton of adjustability, and it's probably a good idea to try a larger harness. If the harness is so loose that you have a significant amount of webbing showing with no padding, it can be uncomfortable as that webbing can cut into you while you're climbing, like this. So again, once it's tightened down and it's the right size, that padding will ideally be touching or overlapping like I have it here. Once the waist belt is on, we can go ahead and check the fit on the leg loops. So these leg loops are slide adjusters, but some leg loops will have a buckle just like I have up here on my harness. And some leg loops will just be fixed leg loops, meaning that there's no adjustment to them. But this one, again, has these slide buckles. So I can slide these to tighten it and slide them back to loosen it up. As long as the leg loops fit, they don't need to be super tight. They should be snug but not uncomfortable. I like to climb with my leg loops a little bit looser, but again, that's just up to personal preference. As far as sizes of harnesses go, you can get a general idea of what size you need by checking different brands and looking at their size charts, measuring your body, and then choosing the size that corresponds. Again, all harnesses are going to fit differently, so it's a good idea to be prepared to try on multiple different harnesses. Now that I have this harness on, we want to go ahead and do our safety checks. So I mentioned this buckle up here before, and ensuring that the webbing is doubled back. What that means is that we want to make sure that the webbing runs through both of these metal loops and comes back in on itself, so you have metal showing on the side with the strap. If you forget to go through the bottom piece of metal on the buckle here, the harness can come undone when you weight it or when you sit in it. So now that we have this closed, we're just going to take a look at it, ensure that we have that piece of webbing showing here, tell ourselves it's closed. Now this harness only has one buckle that's doubled back, but some will have up to 4 or more, 2 on the leg loops and then sometimes 2 on the waist belt of the harness. And you'll want to check this before you start climbing and also have your partner check their harness before they start climbing. You can do this just by taking a look at it, ensuring that you have that webbing showing, and tapping it and saying closed. And then these are both closed because they're adjustable with the buckle, with the slide, and I'm ready to climb. Like backpacks, most climbing harnesses are going to feel comfortable until you climb in them. So it's a good idea to hang in it for a little while until you purchase it to make sure that it fits you right. Most REIs will have the ability to do this for you, so come on down and talk to the expert.
All right, no need to listen to that ending portion there. So all of these videos, if I ever show a video in a lecture, will be on your modules as well if you need to just watch this and not want to watch my entire lecture.